Arizona, 1873. The wind here did not bother with pleasantries. It blew straight from the sun, carrying the grit of hills that looked like old blood, and it tasted of eternity and alkali. It was a wind that tested a person, scraping away everything that was not essential, and Evelyn Hartley, at 22 years old, felt she was failing that test already. The wagon lurched to a final, bone-jarring stop. The red dust, which had been their constant companion for 3 weeks, settled slowly, like a shroud. The white lace of her wedding dress, a dress shipped with great expense from Boston, was no longer white. It was the color of a faded sunset, a pale pink stained with the rust-colored earth of her new home. Red dust clung to the hem, a fine powder that coated her eyelashes and dried her lips until they cracked. Colonel Hartley, her father, sat beside her on the wagon bench. He was a man made of straight lines and regulations, his blue uniform impossibly clean in the grime. He believed in peace, provided that peace was achieved on his terms, with maps and ink and the implied threat of cannons. "Sit up, Evelyn," he said, his voice quiet but as hard as the baked earth beneath them. "You are representing the United States government. Remember your station." She straightened her back. Though the stays of her corset felt like a cage, she was not representing a government. She was representing a land grab, and she knew it. She was the pretty, civilized ribbon on a treaty that smelled of sulfur and bad whiskey. She was the price. The journey from Santa Fe had scraped her raw. For weeks, the world had been nothing but the constant rumble of ironclad wheels, the stink of unwashed soldiers in the escort wagon, and the endless, aching blue of the sky. She had watched the green, gentle hills of her memory fade into the brown, cracked flatlands of the territory, a place where everything, from the cacti to the insects, seemed to carry a weapon. She felt like she was shrinking, the land too vast and her own identity too fragile to survive it. No one chooses where they belong, she thought, the words a bitter litany in her mind. They are just told where to stand. And she was being told to stand here, in a clearing between saguaros that rose like silent, green judges, their arms raised to the sky. The Apache were waiting. This was not a fort. It was not a town. It was a village of wickiups, domed huts of brush and hide that seemed to grow from the earth itself. Fires were lit, sending columns of pungent mesquite smoke into the air, even though the sun was still a high, brutal disk of white heat. The smell of roasting meat, sharp and wild, mingled with the scent of dust and something herbal she could not name. Drums began, not the sharp snare of her father's military band, but a low, steady beat that seemed to come from under her feet. It was the pulse of the land itself, a sound that bypassed her ears and went straight to her bones. A man stepped forward, emerging from the crowd of dark, watchful faces. This, she knew, was Tazan, the chief, the man she was to marry tomorrow. He was younger than she had expected, perhaps only a few years older than herself. He was broad, his chest bare and the color of rich copper, his muscles moving with an easy, animal grace. He wore buckskin leggings and a necklace of carved bone. He radiated a confidence she had never seen in the drawing rooms of the East, the confidence of a man who knew exactly who he was and where he belonged. He smiled, a brief, assessing flash of white teeth. Evelyn felt nothing. A cold, smooth stone had lodged itself where her heart should be. She was a doll. She would smile. She would nod. She would be the bride. Her father dismounted, his boots sinking into the soft dust. He extended his hand to Tazan. "Chief Tazan, it is an honor. May this day mark a lasting peace between our peoples." Tazan took her father's hand, his grip firm. "Colonel Hartley, you have traveled far. Your daughter is welcome here." He turned and offered his hand to Eve. She placed her gloved fingers in his. His palm was calloused and warm. He helped her down, her dusty white dress brushing against his bare skin. She stood on the hard red dirt of Arizona, the drums louder now, the faces of the Apache women watching her with unreadable expressions. She was an alien, a creature of lace and bone china dropped into a world of rock and sun. And then she felt it, a prickling on her neck, a feeling of being watched, not by the curious crowd, but by one, a singular, intense gaze that cut through the noise and the smoke. Her gaze moved past the fire, past the women tending the pots, past her father and her future husband, to the edge of the clearing. He stood half in shadow, leaning against a monolith of basalt rock, his arms crossed. He was not smiling. He was taller than Tazan, leaner, and seemed to be carved from the same unforgiving red rock that surrounded them. Where Tazan was the strong, flowing river, this man was the canyon wall, ancient and unmoving. His black hair was long, held back by a simple leather band. He wore no chief's ornaments, only simple buckskins and high-topped moccasins. But it was his face that held her. It was a face of sharp angles and stark beauty, marked by a scar. A pale, silvery line ran from the outside corner of his left eye straight down to his jaw, a flaw that somehow made his face more severe, more real than any man she had ever seen. And his eyes, they were dark, unblinking, and filled with an assessment so cold it burned. This was the brother, the warrior, Kai. She should have looked away. Decency demanded it. A proper lady from the East, a future bride, would have lowered her gaze, deferred to her husband to be, but her father had brought her here to be a bridge, and she suddenly felt the terrifying, impossible weight of the canyon she was supposed to span. She could not look away. It was an accusation. He was looking at her, Evelyn Hartley, as if she was the one holding the knife, as if she, who had spent the journey terrified of snakes and spiders, was a conqueror. The injustice of it stiffened her spine. She did not ask for this. She was a pawn, the same as any Apache girl married off to another tribe for an alliance. But his eyes did not see a pawn. They saw a queen, a white queen in a game she did not understand, and he held her in contempt for it. Kai did not look away either. He held her gaze. This was not a look of welcome or curiosity. It was a look of recognition. He saw the cage, and he saw the bird. He saw the treaty, and he saw the lie. He saw the white dress, stained with their sacred red earth, and he saw it as a violation. It lasted maybe 4 seconds. It felt like 100 years. It was Tazan's voice, laughing at something her father said, that finally broke the connection. Evelyn flushed. A hot, painful wave of shame and something else, something fierce and unfamiliar, rising in her chest. She turned away abruptly, her heart hammering against her ribs so hard she was sure the sound was as loud as the drums. She finally understood the true meaning of the word wild. It was not the land. It was the man in the shadows. Kai watched her turn away, the blush visible even on her pale, dusty skin. He had seen her chin lift. Ah, there it was, the pride, the thing that white people carried like a shield. They came to steal a man's land, his water, his gods, and they did it with their chins high, as if they were doing him a favor. He did not trust this. He had argued with his brother, in the council lodge, for 2 moons. It is a new time, Kai. Tazan had insisted, his face earnest in the firelight. He was young, so young, and he believed in the goodness of men. The old ways are fighting a war they cannot win. This marriage buys us time. It buys us peace. It buys us chains. Kai had answered, his voice low and rough, the voice of a man who had seen too much. They do not give brides. They take land. This is just a slower knife. Brother, a knife they hide inside a pretty woman. And now the woman was here. She was just as he had pictured. Soft, pale, and breakable. A symbol. Kai had seen the white man's paper before. He had seen it in Sonora. Just before the soldiers came and burned the villages of his cousins, the scar on his face was a gift from a bounty hunter. A man paid in government silver for Apache scalps. That same government now offered a bride, and his brother called it peace. He was his brother's warrior. He was the protector of his people. He would obey his chief, but he would watch. This woman, this Evelyn Hartley, she was the true weapon. The soldiers were just noise. The colonel, her father, was just the hand holding the weapon. But the woman, she was the reason. This marriage was the excuse they needed, the key that would unlock the Apache lands without a single shot fired. They would call her a peacemaker. And behind her, the surveyors and the miners and the railroad men would follow, a tide of greed that would drown them all. She was a lie wrapped in white lace. But her eyes, when they had met his, had not been cold. They had not been proud. Underneath that flash of defiance, he had seen something else, something he recognized. She was terrified, and she was trapped. A bitter, humorless smile touched his lips, unseen in the shadow. A trapped animal was the most dangerous kind. He had seen a coyote, its leg caught in a steel jaw, chew its own limb off to be free. He looked at the white woman, who was now standing stiffly by the fire as Tazan showed her the roasted venison. He wondered what she would be willing to chew through. The wickiup was dark and smelled of dried sage and dust. Evelyn, who insisted everyone call her Eve, lay on a pallet of soft furs, her body aching from the long day. She was still in her chemise, the wedding dress, that monument of white lace and Eastern expectation, hung from a wooden peg. It looked like a pale, sad ghost in the sliver of moonlight that cut through the hut's opening. Sleep was a distant country. She had tried to find it for hours, but her mind was a stampede. The feast had been a blur of smoke, strange foods, and faces she could not read. Tazan, her husband-to-be, had been kind, his smile quick and his English surprisingly good. He had shown her the horses, spoken of the peace this marriage would bring. He was a good man. She knew it objectively, but her heart remained a cold, closed fist. And his brother, Kai? She had felt his eyes on her all evening. He had stood at the edge of the firelight, a tall, scarred silhouette who refused to participate. He was a shadow given form, and his gaze was not kind. It was heavy. It was an anchor, and she felt it was meant to drown her. The drums had finally stopped, perhaps near midnight, and the village had fallen into a thick, listening silence. The desert did not rest. It waited. The first sound was not human. It was the high, terrified whinny of a horse. It was answered by a single, sharp crack, a rifle shot. The night exploded. More shots tore the air. Men were shouting, not in the Apache tongue, but in a guttural mix of English and Spanish. "Fire the brush! Get the ponies! Scalps pay double!" Eve scrambled to her feet, her heart leaping into her throat. The thin hide wall of the wickiup suddenly felt like paper. Another shot, and she heard the thwap of a bullet passing straight through the wall, splintering the wooden peg where her dress hung. She heard Tazan's voice outside, a sharp, commanding roar. The village, moments ago asleep, was now a cauldron of screams and gunfire. She was alone. Her father and his soldiers were camped a mile away, on the other side of the ridge, a stipulation of the treaty. They would not hear this. This was a massacre, not a battle. The hide flap of her wickiup was ripped aside. A man stood framed against the orange light of the burning huts outside. He was huge, bearded, and smelled of whiskey and rancid sweat. He was white, his eyes small and glittering with greed, fixed on her pale shift. "Well now," the man snarled. Stepping inside, he raised his pistol, but then a slow, gap-toothed smile spread across his face. "Looked here, the chief's white bride. We heard you was comin'. You'll fetch a better price than any horse." He lunged, grabbing her arm. Eve screamed, raking her nails across his face. He backhanded her, a blow that sent her sprawling onto the furs, her head ringing. Feisty one, he laughed, grabbing her by the hair and dragging her toward the entrance. I like that. She was being dragged out into the chaos, the dirt scraping her bare legs, the smoke stinging her eyes. Suddenly, the man pulling her went rigid. He made a soft, wet, sighing sound, like air escaping a bladder. His grip on her hair loosened. He stood frozen for a second, his eyes wide with a terrible surprise, looking down at his own chest. A long, dark shape protruded from his buckskin shirt, a knife. He fell sideways. Standing over him, his body taut and lethal in the flickering firelight, was Kai. His face was a mask of cold fury. The scar on his cheek seemed to pull his skin tight, a white line against the copper of his skin. He did not look at her. He yanked his knife free from the bounty hunter's back, wiping the blade clean on the dead man's shirt in one fluid, economical motion. He grabbed her arm. Not her hair, her arm. His grip was steel. Come, he said. It was the first word he had ever spoken to her, and it was not a request. He pulled her to her feet and shoved her into the night. The world was hell. Huts were blazing, throwing sparks high into the black sky. Men were fighting, shadows and flashes of steel. She saw Tazan across the clearing, a war club in his hand, trying to hold the line as a dozen riders tried to stampede the horse herd. Kai did not run toward his brother. He ran the other way, pulling her with him, away from the fight, toward the towering black cliffs that rimmed the village. "Where are we going?" she cried, stumbling over a saddle. He did not answer. Bullets kicked up dust at their feet. A rifle cracked from the rocks above them. The bounty hunters were not just raiders. They were an organized force, and they held the high ground. Kai shoved her, hard. She fell against the rock face, and he pushed her into a narrow cleft, a deep, dark crack in the basalt. He followed her in, crowding the small space, pressing his body against hers and shielding her from the opening. He pushed her head down, his hand firm on the back of her neck. "Do not move," he whispered. His voice was a low vibration that seemed to pass straight through her. "Do not make a sound." They stood there, trapped in the dark, as the battle raged outside. It was a terrible, deafening noise, a symphony of chaos. Eve was pressed against the cold rock, her body shaking so violently she was sure he could feel it. His body was a wall of heat against her back. She could smell him, the smoke of the mesquite fires, the clean scent of the high desert night, and something else, something sharp and metallic. Blood. He was breathing hard, but it was controlled. The steady breath of a man who lived in violence. She was breathing in shallow, ragged gasps. She was inhaling the air he had just exhaled. She became aware of a sharp, stinging pain in her left arm. "Be still," he breathed, his lips brushing her ear. She looked down. In the faint, flickering light from the fires outside, she saw a dark stain spreading across the sleeve of her chemise. "I am hit," she whispered, the words sounding stupid to her own ears. Before she could panic, he moved. He did not ask permission. He released her neck and took her injured arm in his hand. His touch was rough, impersonal. With his free hand, he ripped the delicate white cotton of her sleeve from shoulder to elbow, exposing the wound. It was not a bullet. It was a graze, a long, deep tear in the flesh of her forearm where a bullet had passed too close. Or perhaps a splinter from the rock, but it was bleeding badly. He tore a strip from her ruined sleeve and wadded it into a ball. Then he pressed it into the wound. Hard. Eve cried out, a small, sharp sound that was swallowed by the gunfire. The pain was blinding, a clean, white fire. "I said be still," he commanded. He pressed harder. He leaned in, his face next to hers, his dark eyes scanning the mouth of their small cave. She could feel the pulse in his palm against her bleeding arm. She could see the faint, silvery line of his scar in the gloom. Their breaths mingled, warm and fast, in the cold, stone air. She was trapped in a cave with a man she had been taught to fear, his hand pressing the pain into her, and she had never felt so safe in her life. The world had turned upside down. Her father's soldiers were a mile away, safe in their bedrolls. The civilized men were burning this village, killing women, and had tried to abduct her. The man her world called a savage was the only thing standing between her and death. He was bleeding for her, his hand stopping her own bleeding. The definitions she had built her life upon, the neat boxes of civilized and savage, right and wrong, crumbled into dust. The gunfire began to slow. The shouts became more distant. The raiders had what they came for: the horses. The sound of dozens of galloping hooves faded to the east. Silence returned, heavier this time, broken only by the crackle of burning brush and the first terrible sounds of women weeping in the village. Kai did not move for a long time. He remained pressed against her, a human shield, his hand locked on her arm. "Are they gone?" she finally whispered. Her voice was a dry croak. He let out a long, slow breath. It shuddered, just slightly. Then he slumped. It was not a large movement, but he leaned heavily against the rock wall, his weight coming off her. "Kai," she asked. He pushed himself away from her, turning to face the opening. The pre-dawn sky was now a faint, bruised purple, casting a weak gray light into their hiding place. "They are gone," he said, his voice strained. "For now." And in that thin, watery light, she saw it. A dark, spreading stain covered his left side, high on his ribs, just under his arm. It was not her blood. "You are hurt," she said, her words an echo of his own. "It is nothing." He tried to straighten, to stand tall in the way she had seen him by the fire, but a sharp, ragged intake of breath betrayed him. He braced his hand against the cave wall. "It is not nothing," she said. The terror of the night was receding, replaced by a cold, sharp focus. She was the colonel's daughter. She had seen more gunshot wounds in the Fort Hospital than she ever cared to admit. "That is a bullet." He looked at her, his eyes dark and clouded with pain, but still proud. "The white woman will not tend to me." "Sit down," she ordered. She was shocked by the strength in her own voice. It was not the voice of a bride or a victim. It was the voice of her father. He stared at her, defiant. "Sit down," she said again, her voice low and fierce, "or you will bleed to death before your brother even knows you are alive, and I will not have that." It was a battle of wills, fought in the space of 3 heartbeats. He slowly, agonizingly, slid down the rock wall until he was sitting on the dusty floor of the cave. Eve knelt in front of him. She grabbed the hem of her own ruined petticoat and ripped a long, wide strip of cotton. "Let me see it." He did not move to help. He just watched her, his face a mask of pain and suspicion. "I am not asking," she said. She pushed his arm aside. The buckskin shirt was soaked. The wound was deep, and it was bleeding too much. The bullet was still inside. She knew the signs. She balled up a piece of the cloth and pressed it against the wound, hard, just as he had done for her. He hissed, a long, sharp sound through his clenched teeth. His whole body went rigid, but he did not stop her. She worked quickly, her hands shaking, but her purpose firm. She packed the wound, bound the strip of cloth around his chest as tightly as she could. Her hands were covered in his blood. It was hot and dark. "It will not hold for long," she said, her voice clinical. "The bullet must come out." His skin was already hot. Fever was setting in. He had lost a great deal of blood. His head lolled back against the rock, and his eyes began to close. "No," she said, her voice sharp. "You do not. You stay awake. Look at me." His eyes fluttered open, narrowed to black slits. "You saved my life," she said, her voice suddenly thick with an emotion she could not name. "I do not understand why they came. I do not understand why you saved me." His lips quirked, that ghost of a smile she had seen before, now twisted in pain. "Tazan, he wants his bride, safe." "No," she said, shaking her head. The denial, immediate and absolute. "You did not do this for Tazan. You were here. You fought that man before you could have known who he was. You are not dying here. Do you hear me?" His gaze was heavy, his consciousness clearly fading. He was slipping away from her. A desperate, primal panic seized her. She could not let this man die. He was the only thing that made sense in a world that had gone mad. She grabbed his face, her bloody hands framing his jaw, her fingers pressing against the sharp line of his cheekbones. She forced him to look at her. The scar on his cheek was a pale, angry line against the sudden grayness of his skin. "Listen to me," she whispered, her face inches from his. "My name is Evelyn Hartley. You are Kai. You are a warrior of the Apache. And if you die, I swear to God, I will not let them forget your name." His eyes focused on hers. The haze of pain cleared for just a moment, and that sharp, burning intelligence returned. He saw her. He truly saw her. Not the white bride, not the colonel's daughter. Her. He did not speak. He did not have the strength. He just held her gaze, a silent, binding contract made in blood and shadow. Then, as the first bloody fingers of the Arizona dawn began to tear across the sky, his eyes closed. The sun rose on a scene of devastation. The village was a graveyard of smoking poles and charred hide. The smell of ash was thick, catching in the back of Eve's throat, mingling with the metallic tang of blood. She could hear the high, thin wail of a woman mourning. It was a sound that would never leave her. Kai was a dead weight against her side. She had managed to half drag, half carry him from the cleft in the rock, his body lurching with every step. Her own arm throbbed, a dull, fiery ache from shoulder to wrist, but the sight of the blood soaking his side terrified her more. He was barely conscious, his breath a shallow, ragged rasp. She stumbled out of the narrow wash and into the main clearing, her bare feet cut and bruised by the stones. "Help!" she cried, her voice cracking. "Please, he is hurt. He needs help." Two groups converged on her at once. From the east came the thud of military boots. Her father, Colonel Hartley, was at their head, his face a mask of pale fury, flanked by 6 of his soldiers, their rifles at the ready. From the west came Tazan, his face smeared with soot and his eyes hollowed by grief and rage. Behind him stood the remaining Apache warriors, their knives drawn, their expressions murderous. They all stopped, a tense standoff of maybe 20 yards, their gaze fixed on the sight before them. They saw Evelyn Hartley, their white dove, their political bride, her shift torn to rags, her hair unbound and wild, her skin smeared with dirt and gore. And they saw her clinging to Kai, the Apache warrior, his arm draped over her shoulder, his body pressed against hers, his blood staining her white skin. It was a picture of perfect, damning intimacy. "Evelyn!" her father roared, his voice cracking with a mix of horror and relief. He took a step forward. "Get away from him, soldiers! Take that man!" "No!" Eve screamed, trying to shield Kai as 2 soldiers rushed forward. "You do not understand!" But Tazan was faster. He held up his hand, a sharp, commanding gesture that stopped both the soldiers and his own men. His eyes were not on Eve. They were locked on his brother. "Kai," Tazan said, his voice quiet, lethal. "What is the meaning of this? Where did you take her?" "He did not take me," Eve cried, her voice rising to a hysterical pitch. She looked wildly from her father to Tazan. "We were attacked bounty hunters, white men. They burned the village. They tried to take me. Kai saved me. He saved my life." Her father took her by the arm, his grip bruising. He pulled her away from Kai. "Evelyn, Be silent." Kai, deprived of her support, buckled. He fell to his knees, his head hanging, his body swaying. "He is hurt," Eve sobbed, struggling against her father's grip. "Can you not see he is shot? He needs a doctor, father. Please." Colonel Hartley ignored her. He looked at Tazan, his face grim. "Chief, it appears your brother has violated the truce. He has taken my daughter. This is an act of war." Tazan's gaze was unreadable. He looked at the smoking ruins of his village. He looked at the bodies of his people being carried from the ashes. 7 of his people were dead. He looked at his brother, kneeling in the dirt, covered in blood, beside the woman he was supposed to marry. "He saved me," Eve whispered, the tears cutting clean tracks through the grime on her face. "Tazan, you must believe me. He is your brother." Tazan walked forward slowly until he stood over Kai. He looked down at his brother for a long, terrible moment. Kai raised his head, his eyes clouded with pain, but unbroken. "You were not here," Tazan said, his voice thick with a grief that was curdling into betrayal. "You were not here to fight with me. You were in the rocks, with her. They ambushed us." Kai managed to get out, his voice a low rasp. "I took her to safety." Safety. Tazan repeated the word, as if it tasted like poison. He pointed to a small body, a child, being covered by a blanket. "Was she safe? Was my village safe? Or were you saving the white woman first?" "Tazan, no," Eve pleaded. Tazan turned his gaze on her, and the warmth she had seen there yesterday was gone. His eyes were as cold and hard as the basalt cliffs. You were to be the bond. The fires are not even out, and our blood is spilled, and my brother is found with you. The wedding is off." He turned to his warriors. "Take him. He will be held for judgment." 2 Apache warriors seized Kai, hauling him roughly to his feet. He did not resist. He only looked at Eve, a brief, fleeting glance, before they dragged him away. "Father, you cannot let this happen," Eve begged, grabbing her father's uniformed sleeve. "You know those bounty hunters. You know they operate here. This was not Kai. This was not the Apache." Her father's face was stone. "Evelyn, you are hysterical. You do not know what you saw. That man is a savage. He saw an opportunity and he took it. He abducted you. It is that simple. Now you will come back to my tent. You will be cleaned, and you will not say another word. Is that understood? The entire treaty, years of work, is in jeopardy because of your confusion." "It is not confusion," she shouted, her last shred of composure snapping. "It is the truth. You are a liar. You are all liars." He slapped her. The force of the blow snapped her head to the side, the sharp sting a shock that silenced her more effectively than any command. "You are a Hartley," he said, his voice low and shaking with rage. "You will act like one. You will not defend a savage who laid hands on you. You will not shame your family." He turned and stalked away, leaving her standing alone in the center of the ruined village, the Apache women staring at her with open hatred. Her own people, the soldiers, looking at her with pity and disgust. She was an outcast, trapped in the smoking ruins of a peace she had been sent to build. For 2 days, the world was a cage. Eve was confined to her father's tent, a canvas prison guarded by a soldier who refused to meet her eyes. She had been cleaned, her wounds bound by a grim-faced army surgeon, and given a new dress, a simple gray cotton that felt like a burial shroud. She tried to speak to her father again. He would not see her. He was in constant, tense negotiations with Tazan and the Apache elders. The air was thick with accusation. The soldiers blamed the Apache for the broken truce. The Apache, grieving and furious, blamed the soldiers for failing to protect them from the raiders. And Tazan, for his part, laid the entire blame for the dishonor on his brother. The truth was a casualty no one was interested in saving. Tazan, in his grief, had become a man she did not recognize. He had loved her, she thought, or perhaps he had loved the idea of her, the peace she represented. Now, that peace was broken, and his love had turned to a cold, bitter righteousness. He would not see her. He would not hear her pleas. He was a chief, and his brother had betrayed him. Kai was held in the village's deep storage pit, a hole in the earth used to keep corn and dried meat cool, now covered with a heavy grate of woven cottonwood branches. He was a prisoner of his own people. On the third day, Tazan came to her father's tent. Eve was sitting on her cot when he entered, ducking under the canvas flap. "Evelyn," he said, his voice was flat. "Tazan, thank God. You must listen to me." She stood, rushing toward him. He held up a hand, stopping her. "I did not come to listen. I came to tell you what has been decided." "Decided what about Kai, is he? Have they tended his wound?" "The bullet was removed," Tazan said, his face impassive. "He is strong. He will live." Eve sagged with relief, a relief so profound it made her knees weak. "He will live," Tazan continued, his voice hardening. "To be exiled. At dawn, he will be cast out. He is no longer my brother. He is no longer Apache. He is nothing." "No," Eve whispered. "You cannot. It is unjust. He is innocent." "Innocent?" Tazan's voice rose for the first time. "My people are dead. My honor is gone. And you speak of innocence." "I speak the truth. He fought for me. He killed the man who attacked me." "So you say," Tazan said. "But the raiders were gone. You were gone for hours. When we found you, you were with him. That is the only truth I see." "Then you are blind," she said, her voice low and fierce. He looked at her, and for a fleeting moment, she saw the man from the feast, the young chief who had smiled at her. His face was etched with a pain that mirrored her own. "Perhaps I am," he said softly. "But it is done." He turned to leave. "Tazan," she said, stopping him. "This is not justice. This is pride." He looked back at her. "In my world, sometimes they are the same thing." He left her in the tent, the silence heavier than before. She was a political bride with no wedding, a peacemaker in a land preparing for war, a woman who had been saved by a man who was now being condemned for it. She sat on the cot, her hands clenched in her lap. She felt the smooth, cold stone of apathy she had felt upon her arrival trying to settle back into her heart. It would be so easy to give up, to let her father send her back east, to pretend this land and its blood and its impossible choices had never happened. She could go back to Boston and marry a banker and grow old in a house with curtains. She thought of Kai. She thought of his hand on her arm, his body shielding hers in the cave. She thought of his eyes, dark and pained, as she held his face. She thought of him sitting in that dark hole, abandoned by his brother, betrayed by the woman he had saved. And she thought of his quote, the one Tazan had relayed to her father in disgust during the negotiations, the words Kai had spoken when his brother demanded he confess. "A man does not need to prove what the Mother Earth has witnessed." He had not defended himself. He had not pleaded. He had stood on the truth, and he did not care if anyone else stood with him. The cold stone in her chest did not just crack. It shattered, and in its place, a hot, defiant, and unfamiliar emotion bloomed. It was not love. Not yet. It was a terrible, burning clarity. That night, she waited until the camp was silent, until the moon was high and the soldiers were lax. She slipped from her tent, a ghost in a gray dress. She moved through the shadows, every sense alive, her heart a frantic drum against her ribs. She reached the storage pit. It was unguarded. Tazan had deemed his brother's dishonor so great that no one would dare approach him. She knelt by the grate. In the pale moonlight, she could see his shape, sitting upright against the far wall of the pit. "Kai," she whispered. He did not move for a long time. She thought perhaps he was asleep or unconscious. Then, his head lifted. He looked up at her, his face a map of shadows. "You should not be here, white woman," he whispered, his voice rough from disuse. "They are exiling you at dawn." "I know. It is my fault," she said, her voice breaking. I told them you were innocent. Tazan, my father, no one will listen." "It is not your fault," he said. His voice was flat, devoid of emotion. "I will not let this happen," she said, her hands gripping the rough wooden bars of the grate. "I will go to Tazan again. I will tell them I lied, that you did take me. If it will—" "No, that will not work." "Stop!" he commanded. His voice was weak, but it still held the steel she remembered. "You will do nothing. You will go back to your father's tent and let you die out there. He's sending you into the desert with no horse, no water, no weapon. It is my path." "No," she hissed, the injustice of it a physical pain. "It is not. It is wrong. I will not be a part of it." He was silent. He just watched her, his gaze intense, seeming to strip away her skin, her dress, her lies, until he saw the raw, shaking core of her. "You should go back east," he said, his voice softer now. "This land is not for you. It will eat you." "I am not going back," she whispered. I cannot." He pulled himself up, using the dirt wall for support, until he was standing, his face only a few feet below hers. The moonlight caught the pale line of his scar. "You do not belong to them," he said, his voice a low, rough rumble. "You do not belong to Tan. You do not belong to your father, and you know it." She stared at him. Her breath caught in her chest. He had not absolved her. He had not thanked her. He had not asked for her help. He had set her free. He saw her, not as a bride, not as a peacemaker, not as a white woman. He saw her, a prisoner, and he had just told her the cage door was open. A single hot tear rolled down her cheek and dropped through the grate, landing in the dust near his feet. He held her gaze for one more heartbeat, then turned and retreated into the deepest shadow of the pit, leaving her alone with the moon and a truth that would change everything. She did not go back to the tent. She went to the ashes. The Apache village was silent, a place of ghosts, but she moved through it with a new purpose. She found what she was looking for outside the wickiup where she was supposed to have been married. A heavy iron skillet, left by the raiders, lay half buried in the soot. It was heavy, clumsy, but it would be a lever. She moved like a shadow, a skill she did not know she possessed. Her father's tent was quiet. The guard was posted at the front, his back to her. She slipped around to the rear, where the canvas was tied to the supply wagon. She found her father's small field chest. Inside, beneath his maps and papers, was his spare revolver, a Navy model, and a box of cartridges. Her hands did not shake as she took them. She took a long hunting knife from the scabbard on his saddle. She took 2 canteens of water and a sack of hardtack. The horses were the greatest risk. The soldiers' mounts were tethered in a long line. She moved down the line, her hand outstretched, whispering soft words she had used on her mare back in Boston. She chose 2 horses at the far end, a strong-looking bay and a smaller sorrel. She cut their lead ropes with a hunting knife. She led them slowly, their hooves muffled in the deep dust, back toward the storage pit. "Kai," she whispered again. He was waiting, standing beneath the grate. "Stand back," she commanded. She jammed the handle of the iron skillet between the heavy woven branches and the hard-packed earth. She put all her weight on it. The wood groaned. It was old, baked dry by the sun, but it was strong. Again. She grunted, repositioning the skillet. She pushed. A dry, cracking sound split the night air. It sounded as loud as a gunshot. "Eve, no!" he hissed from the pit. They will hear. They will hear, she agreed, her breath coming in sobs of effort. And then they will see. She gave one last, desperate heave. The wooden bar snapped. The grate broke, one side falling into the pit. A shout went up from the guard post at her father's tent. "Halt! Who goes there?" "Now," Eve said. Throwing the skillet aside, she reached her hand down into the darkness. "Come on, we have to go now." He grabbed her forearm, his grip still impossibly strong. He used her as an anchor, hauling his wounded body up out of the hole. He stumbled as he cleared the edge, falling to one knee, his breath a sharp, agonized gasp. His wound, she saw, had bled through the new bandage. "The horses," she said, pulling him up. A shot rang out. A bullet whined past her ear. The camp exploded into a chaos of shouting men and bugle calls. "Mount!" she yelled, shoving Kai toward the bay. He grabbed the horse's mane, his foot fumbling for the stirrup. He could not make the climb. His left side was useless. "Go!" he grunted, pushing her toward the sorrel. "Save yourself. Go!" "I am not leaving you," she screamed. She saw her father emerge from his tent, his pistol in his hand. She saw Tazan run from the wickiups, his face a mask of disbelief. Eve put her hands on Kai's hips and shoved him, with all her strength, up onto the saddle. He landed draped over the horse's neck, barely conscious. She slapped the bay's rump. "Hard. Ride." She swung onto the sorrel's back, her gray dress hiking up to her thighs. She dug her heels into the horse's flanks. The sorrel leapt forward, following the bay. They rode straight into the black heart of the desert, away from the river, away from the camps. She heard more shots, heard her father's voice roaring her name, a sound of pure fury. She heard the sound of pursuit, the thunder of at least a dozen horses behind them. She leaned low over the sorrel's neck, her hair whipping free, stinging her face. Kai was slumped over his horse, but he was holding on. They were a two-headed creature fleeing into the void. The world was gray, then black, then gray again. The stars were their only guide. They rode west, toward the mountains that were a jagged, dark promise on the horizon. For an hour, the sound of their pursuers was a constant, terrifying echo. Then the wind began to rise. It came not as a breeze, but as a wall, a solid thing, a hot, suffocating breath from a giant's lungs. It hit them with a roar, carrying so much sand and dust that the world simply disappeared. The stars vanished. The ground vanished. The horse in front of her vanished. "Kai!" she screamed into the howling darkness. "Here!" His voice was a faint tear in the fabric of the noise. She pushed her horse forward until she bumped into the bay's flank. The sand was a million tiny needles, stinging every inch of her exposed skin. The horses whinnied, turning their backs to the wind, refusing to go on. "We cannot stop," she yelled. "We must," he yelled back. "They cannot track us in this, but we will die if we ride. Get off. Keep the horses between you and the wind." She slid from the sorrel's back. The wind nearly tore her from her feet. She huddled against the horse's belly, her hands linked in its mane, her eyes squeezed shut. The sorrel and the bay pressed together for warmth, for an anchor, and she and Kai were in the small, protected space between them. She felt him sink down beside her, his back against the sorrel's legs, his body just inches from hers. They did not speak. There was nothing to say that the wind did not drown out. They just endured. They were two small, breathing things at the bottom of a raging, sandy ocean. When the storm finally passed, hours later, the world was remade. It was just before dawn. The sky was a pale, bruised violet. The landscape was a new geography of smooth, wind-carved dunes, and there was no sound. The pursuit was gone. The world was empty, scoured clean. They rode for 2 more days. They crossed the sluggish, brown ribbon of the San Pedro River, the horses sinking to their bellies in the mud. They rode past the ghosts of abandoned mines, the skeletal remains of wooden headframes standing like gallows against the sky. They climbed, leaving the saguaro and the alkali flats behind, moving up into the high country. The air grew thinner, cooler. The red rock gave way to pines, tall and straight, that smelled of resin and high, clean places. Kai did not speak, except to point. "Water," he would rasp, pointing to a seep in a canyon wall. "Here," he would signal, indicating a place to rest. He was a man of the earth, and even wounded. He read it like a book. But he was fading. His wound was festered. The fever was in him, a fire she could see burning in his eyes. On the third day, she herself began to stumble. The graze on her arm was a swollen, angry red, a hot, pulsing line of pain. Her head ached. The cool pine trees seemed to waver, to melt into one another. "We must stop," she said, her voice sounding thick in her own ears. He looked at her, his own face a gray mask of pain. He nodded. He led them off the deer trail they were following, into a thicket of scrub oak, to a small, shallow cave hidden behind a curtain of wild grapevine. She slid off the horse and her legs buckled. She fell to the pine needle floor of the cave and did not get up. She drifted. Her world became a small, hot place, a fever dream of her father's angry face and Hazan's betrayal and the sound of gunfire. She was hot. Then she was freezing, her body shaking in violent shivers. She was aware, dimly, of things happening around her. The smell of wood smoke, the taste of cool water. A canteen pressed to her cracked lips. A hand, rough, turning her, lifting her. She woke to a touch. It was not the urgent, clinical touch of the last few days. It was a touch of impossible, aching gentleness. A hand, calloused and warm, was resting on her cheek. She opened her eyes. Kai was kneeling beside her. The fire was a small, steady glow, pushing back the shadows in their small cave. Outside, the world was blue with twilight. He had stripped off his ruined buckskin shirt. His chest and side were tightly bound with the last of her petticoat, but the bandage was clean. Her own arm had been redressed. The bandage was damp and cool. He was looking at her, his head tilted, his gaze unshielded. The pain was still there, etched in the lines around his eyes, but the fever had receded. He was just looking at her. His thumb moved, a slow, hesitant motion, brushing a strand of matted hair back from her temple. She stared at him, her heart doing a slow, painful turn in her chest. This was the man who had terrified her. The savage, the shadow, the man who had stared at her with such contempt, and now his hand was on her face, and his eyes held an expression of such raw, unguarded concern that it broke her heart. The bride was meant for an Apache's brother. That was the plan. That was the treaty. A life, arranged in ink, a world of politics and polite, bloodless lies. But one night had changed her heart forever. One night of fire and blood. One night of truth in a dark cave. One night of a shared look in a prison pit. This journey had not been an escape. It had been a discovery. "Your fever is broken," he whispered. His voice was a low rasp. "So is yours," she breathed. She did not move. She did not want him to ever move his hand. "I found a spring. Clean water. I cleaned your arm. The infection. It is better." "You," she said, her own hand coming up, weak, trembling, to rest on his wrist. "Your side. You should be resting." "I hunted," he said, as if it were an explanation. He nodded toward the fire, where a rabbit was roasting on a greenwood spit. "You must eat. You are weak." "Kai," she whispered, her eyes searching his face, the scar, the sharp jaw, the dark, deep-set eyes. He was not a savage. He was a man, and he was the only man who had ever truly seen her. "Why?" she asked, the question encompassing everything. "Why did you save me? Why did you not let me go? Why are you taking care of me?" His gaze did not waver. His thumb brushed her cheekbone, a touch that sent a shiver through her that had nothing to do with the fever. "When I was a boy," he said, his voice slow, picking the English words with care. "I watched a hawk, its wing broken by a stone. It fell to the ground, but it did not die. It fought. It fought the coyotes. It fought the sun. It fought until its wing mended, and it flew again." He looked at her, his meaning clear. "You are not a dove, Evelyn Hartley. You are a hawk. Your cage was just bigger than mine." They were quiet. The only sound the hiss and crackle of the fire. The space between them was no longer a few inches. It was a new, fragile world. "They will call this an abduction," she said, the reality of their situation a cold stone in her stomach. "They will say you stole me. My father will send the entire army after you." "I know," he said. He did not move his hand. "They will hunt you down. Tazan will hunt you." "I know." She looked at him, at the simple, terrible truth in his eyes. He had known this. He had known the cost when he took her hand in the pit. He had chosen this. "We cannot go back," she said. "No," he said. "And we cannot go forward. There is no place for us." His hand finally moved from her cheek, but only to take her hand, the one that rested on his wrist. He laced his fingers through hers. His skin was rough against her own. "Then we will make a place," he said. It was not a promise of love. It was something harder and more real. It was a statement of fact, a shared truth in a world of lies. The next morning, the weakness had passed, leaving a hollow, aching hunger. They ate the rabbit in silence, the meat tough but life-giving. The sun was filtering through the high pines, and the air was crisp. Eve stood at the mouth of the cave, looking out over the vast, blue-green canyons. She was hundreds of miles from anything she had ever known. She was a fugitive, a traitor to her people. "My father," she said, her back to him. "He will not stop. This is a war now. Because of me, because he thinks you took me." Kai came to stand beside her. He was still in pain, but he stood tall, his presence a comfort. "He thinks what he wants to think." "I could go back," she said, the words tasting like ash. I could ride back, tell them the truth, tell them I ran, that you did not take me. I am his daughter. He might listen to me. It might save you from this, from being hunted." He was quiet for a long time, watching a real hawk circle on the updrafts far below them. "If you go back," he said, his voice flat, "he will put you on a train. He will send you back to your Boston. He will put you in a new cage, a stronger one, and he will hunt me anyway." He turned to look at her. "He will hunt me not because you are with me. He will hunt me because I am Apache, and I am free." He left the choice in her hands, the safe lie, or the impossible, dangerous truth. She looked at his face, at the man who had seen her, and she knew. She had never really had a choice at all. They moved through the high pines for another day, but the strength they had gained in the cave was a false spring. Kai was moving slowly, his body rigid with pain. The wound in his side, torn open again by the escape, was weeping. He was losing blood, and the fever was returning. A restless, glassy sheen in his eyes. Eve's own arm throbbed, but her greater fear was for him. He was the hawk, but his wing was truly broken. "We must rest, Kai," she insisted as the sun began to dip, painting the canyon walls a violent orange. "No," he rasped, his voice barely a whisper. He was slumped over the bay's neck. "He is close. I can smell the smoke from their fires. Cavalry. They are burning oat straw, not wood." He knew. He could smell her father's army on the wind. He tried to urge his horse faster, pushing them deeper into a network of dry arroyos and winding canyons. He was searching for a path, a way through the rock that the soldiers would not know. Eve looked at the walls closing in around them, a sheer red rock that rose hundreds of feet on either side. Kai, it does not feel right. It is too narrow. He pulled his horse to a stop. He looked around, his fever-bright gaze scanning the rim. He swayed in the saddle. I have made a mistake. This is not the pass. It is a box, a trap. As the words left his lips, they heard it. The clink of a steel horseshoe on stone from above, the creak of saddle leather. Evelyn! The voice was a roar, amplified by the canyon walls. It was her father. Eve looked up. On the rim above them, silhouetted against the fading sky, were soldiers. Not just a patrol, at least 30 men, their rifles leveled. It is over. Daughter, tell that savage to drop his weapons. Kai slid from the horse, landing on his feet. He was unsteady, but he was a warrior. He pulled the long hunting knife from his belt. It was the only weapon they had. He pushed Eve behind him, his wounded body a frail, defiant shield. Father, do not shoot! Eve screamed, stepping out from behind him. He is sick. We are unarmed. We will surrender. Get behind me, Kai commanded, his voice a low growl. Stand down, Apache, a soldier yelled from the rim. Fire a warning shot, Colonel Hartley commanded. A rifle cracked. The bullet was not a warning. It was aimed. Perhaps the soldier was nervous. Perhaps his hand slipped. The heavy slug hit the rock just beside Kai's head, sending a spray of stone chips into his face. He flinched, raising his arm to shield his eyes. A second shot, from the other side of the rim. This soldier did not miss. Kai's body jerked, a violent, unnatural spasm. He made no sound, but he dropped the knife. He stood frozen for a second, his eyes wide with a terrible, final surprise. Then he collapsed, folding in on himself, a dark heap on the red canyon floor. No! Eve's scream was a physical thing, tearing from her throat, a sound of pure, animal grief. She ran to him, falling to her knees in the dust. He was on his face. She turned him over, her hands frantic. The bullet had taken him high in the right shoulder, shattering the bone. It was a terrible wound, a ragged, bloody hole. He was unconscious, his breathing shallow. You killed him! She shrieked, looking up at the stone faces on the rim. You murderers! You killed him! Soldiers were clambering down the rock face, sliding down the scree slopes. They swarmed the canyon floor. 2 of them grabbed her, hauling her to her feet. Let go of me, he needs help, he is dying, she fought, kicking and scratching, her nails raking one man's face. Evelyn, enough, her father's voice. He was there, his face ashen, his uniform covered in dust. He looked older, broken. You will control yourself. He is dying, she sobbed, her fight gone, replaced by a cold, hollow despair. Father, please, he saved my life. He is not what you think. He is a dead man, her father said, his voice flat. He looked at Kai, his expression one of pure, cold disgust. Sergeant, tie his hands. Get him on a mule. If he lives to reach the fort, he will hang. If he dies on the way, it saves the government a rope. No, Eve whispered. Get her on a horse, her father commanded, turning his back on her. Tie her hands if you must. She is not to be trusted. She is clearly unwell. They dragged her away. They tied her wrists and put her on the sorrel. She did not fight them. She just watched, her heart a cold, dead stone, as they tied Kai's hands behind his back and slung him, like a sack of grain, over the back of a pack mule. He was a broken thing, bleeding into the dust, and she, his hawk, was back in her cage. The ride back to Fort Grant was a blur of misery. She was a prisoner, herded by the men who had once tipped their hats to her. They did not speak to her. They looked at her with contempt. The colonel's daughter, the savage's woman. The fort was a stark, ugly square of fresh-cut pine logs against the sky. They took Kai straight to the stockade, a small, high-walled pen in the center of the parade ground. They cut him loose from the mule and he fell to the ground. 2 soldiers dragged him through the gate and tossed him onto the bare dirt inside. They took Eve to her father's quarters. It was not a tent, but a small, plank-board house. They put her in her own room, the room she had slept in for a week before the wedding. It had a bed with a real mattress and a lace curtain on the window. A soldier stood guard outside the door. She heard the sound of a heavy bar being dropped into place. She sat on the bed. She was still wearing the gray dress, now torn and stained with dirt and Kai's blood. She stared at the wall. She felt nothing. She was hollowed out. Hours later, the door opened. Her father entered. He had washed his face. His uniform was brushed clean. He looked at her, his face a mask of cold disappointment. "You have shamed me, Evelyn," he said, his voice quiet, which was worse than his yelling. "You have shamed your family, your name, and your nation." "He did not kidnap me," she said, her voice a monotone. "I helped him escape. I went with him, of my own free will." "I do not care about the details," her father said, waving his hand dismissively. "I care about the fact you were found in the wilderness, living with a native. You are compromised. He is a good man. He saved my life, twice. He is a savage who has bewitched you. This disgusting madness. It ends now." "What will you do to him?" she asked, her voice trembling, the hollowness beginning to fill with a cold dread. "The Apache, he is in the stockade. He will be seen by the post surgeon. We will keep him alive." A small, wild hope flared in her. "So you can listen to him, so you can learn the truth." Her father looked at her as if she were a fool. "We will keep him alive so he can stand trial. He will be tried by a military tribunal for the kidnapping of a white woman and sedition against the United States government. He will be found guilty. And then he will be hanged. In the center of the parade ground, as an example to the rest of his tribe." The floor seemed to drop out from beneath her. "You cannot. He is innocent. I will testify. I will tell them the truth. I will tell them I freed him." "You will do no such thing," her father said, his voice turning to ice. "You are unwell. You are suffering from the trauma of your abduction. You are hysterical and not of sound mind. Your testimony, should you be foolish enough to offer it, would be dismissed as the ravings of a disturbed woman. I have already made the post commander aware of your fragile mental state." This was his checkmate. He had not just locked her body, he had locked her voice. He had invalidated her. You would do that," she whispered, staring at him. This was not her father. This was a stranger, a man made of regulations and cold, hard pride. "I am saving you from yourself. I am saving our name." He stood straight, his duty a shield around him. "You will be on the 8 o'clock stagecoach to Tucson in the morning. I have arranged a military escort. From there, you will take a train to St. Louis and another to Boston. You will go to your Aunt Mary. You will tell her you were ill, that the desert air did not agree with you. This entire filthy episode will be forgotten." He walked to the door. "I am doing this because I am your father, and because I love you." He left. She heard the bar slide back into place. She was truly, finally, trapped. He was going to hang Kai, and he was sending her away, and he had made it impossible for her to stop any of it. She lay on the bed, silent tears tracking through the dirt on her face, and waited for the world to end. Night fell. The fort was quiet, save for the lonely call of a sentry on the wall. She did not sleep. She just lay there, a dead thing, listening to her own breathing. Sometime after midnight, she heard a sound, not at the door, at the window, A soft tapping on the glass. She sat up, her heart stopping. A shadow moved outside the lace curtain. "Evelyn." The voice was a low whisper. It was not Kai. It was Tazan. She scrambled off the bed and ran to the window. Her hands fumbling with the latch, she pushed it open. Tazan stood in the darkness of the alleyway between the houses. He was not in his chief's finery. He wore only a breechclout and moccasins. He was a shadow. "Tazan," she whispered, her voice thick with disbelief. "What are you doing here? They will see you. They will shoot you." "I have come," he said, his voice low and heavy with a sadness that matched her own. "To see the woman my brother loves." The words hit her like a physical blow. I... "Do not," he said, his voice soft. "Do not lie. Not anymore. I was blind. Grief is a dust storm. It fills a man's eyes, his heart. I saw what I wanted to see. A betrayer." "He did not betray you," she whispered, her hand gripping the windowsill. "I know," Tazan said. "I saw his face when your father's men dragged him in. He was broken, but he was not ashamed. And I saw your face. I saw the truth. He did not betray me. I betrayed him." He looked down, his shame a visible weight. "He is Apache. He saved you. It is what a warrior does. I was a chief, and I forgot what it means to be a brother." "They are going to hang him," she sobbed, the words tearing out of her. "At dawn, my father, he will not listen. He says I am mad." "Yes, the white man's rope, a coward's death, for a man who has more honor than your entire army." Tazan looked up, his eyes hard in the moonlight. "It will not happen." "How can we stop it? The fort is walled. There are guards everywhere. I am locked in." "I came to give you this," Tazan said. He reached through the window and pressed something into her hand. It was a long, thin, wickedly sharp piece of steel. A soldier's bayonet, broken from its rifle. A knife. "The stockade," he said, speaking quickly. "He is wounded, but his hands are tied in front of him. There is another man in there, one of my people, held for being drunk. I have spoken to him, through the logs. He is waiting. He will cut Kai's bonds." "But the wall," Eve said, her mind racing, the fog of despair burning away. "It is too high, and there are guards." "There is a supply wagon," Tazan said, "by the south gate. It is loaded with hay for the next relay station. It leaves in 1 hour, before the sun. If a man, even a wounded man, were hidden in that hay, he could be free of this place by the time they find him gone." "But the guards, the yard is open, they will see him. They will shoot him before he takes 2 steps." "They will not be looking," Tazan said, and a dark, grim smile touched his lips. "Because they will be looking at me." "What? What do you mean?" "My warriors are outside the north gate. They are waiting. In a few minutes, the stable will be on fire. It will be a distraction. Every soldier in this fort, including the ones at the stockade, will run to the north gate. It will give you the time you need." Eve stared at him, horrified. "Tazan, no, they will catch you. They will kill you, or they will hang you." "Yes," he said simply. "I am his brother. I put him in that cage. It is my duty to break it." He looked at her, his gaze intense, measuring her one last time. "He loves you, Evelyn Hartley. It is a love that has cost him his people, his name, and now his life. I came here to see if the woman he chose was worthy of that love." His eyes burned into hers. "If you love him, prove that love is not afraid of blood, not his and not yours." He reached past her and, with the handle of the bayonet, broke the simple wooden latch that locked the window's outer shutters. He pushed them open. "The stockade is across the yard," he whispered. "The wagon is to the left of the south gate. You have 1 hour. Do not fail him." He turned to leave. "Tazan, wait!" she called, her voice a desperate whisper. "Where will you go? How will you escape?" He looked back at her, a strange, sad peace on his face. "I will not escape," he said. "I am the chief who attacked a military fort. I will be here to answer for the fire. I am trading my life for his." He melted back into the shadows, gone as if he had never been. Eve stood in the center of the room, the cold steel of the bayonet in her hand, the cold, sharp finality of it. Tazan was going to die to save his brother. He was redeeming his honor with his life. But she knew, with a sudden, terrible clarity, that it would not be enough. She knew her father. If Tazan set that fire, her father would see it as an act of war. He would hang Tazan, and he would still hunt Kai. He would send his army out to hunt down the savage who had escaped, and he would not stop until Kai was dead. Tazan's sacrifice would save Kai's life tonight, but it would doom them both tomorrow. She could not just save Kai. She had to save Tazan too, and there was only one way to do that. She could not just run. She had to fight, not with a knife, but with the truth. She had to stop her father. She had to face him, not as a daughter, but as an enemy. She had to burn down his world of lies, just as Tazan was about to burn down the stables. She took a deep breath, the cold night air filling her lungs. She looked at the bayonet. Love is not afraid of blood. She tucked the knife into the waistband of her dress and climbed out the window. Eve dropped from the window into the narrow alley, the cold steel of the bayonet a heavy weight in her hand, a colder weight in her heart. The fort was asleep. A single sentry walked the rampart above the south gate, his footsteps a lonely, rhythmic echo. She was a ghost in this fortress, a woman who belonged nowhere, running to stop a war that had already begun inside her own soul. She kept to the deepest shadows, moving along the back of the officers' quarters, her bare feet making no sound on the hard-packed dirt. She had to reach the north gate. She had to find Tazan. She had to stop him from trading his life for Kai's, a sacrifice that would only buy more blood. She had to make him see that the only way out was not with fire, but with the truth. She was 20 yards from the stables when she heard it. Not a shout, but a low grunt, the wet, solid sound of a fist hitting flesh. A shadow stumbled out from behind the stables. It was a soldier, his garrison cap knocked from his head. He took 2 steps, his hands clutching his throat, and then fell, a knife buried in his back. Tazan stepped out after him, his face a grim mask. He was not alone. 2 other Apache warriors, shadows just as silent as he, were with him. They had already scaled the wall. "Tazan, no," she whispered, stepping from the alley. "Do not do this. It is a trap." He spun, his own knife raised, his eyes wide with shock at seeing her. "Evelyn, get back. It is too late. My brother. He is buying Kai's death, not his life," she pleaded, walking toward him. "My father will not see this as a sacrifice. He will see it as an attack. He will hunt you both down." Tazan hesitated, his face torn. He must be free. I owe him this." "You owe him the truth," she insisted, grabbing his arm. It was in that exact second that the world erupted. It was not Tazan's fire. It was a sound from the south wall, the wall she had just left. A high, ululating cry that ripped the night in two. A war cry. It was followed by a single gunshot, then a dozen more. Tazan's eyes widened, not in triumph, but in horror. He looked past Eve, toward the parade ground. "No," he whispered. "He was not supposed to. He is wounded. He is a fool." "Who?" Eve cried, spinning around. "Kai." The south gate, the weakest point, was under attack. Kai had not waited. He had not trusted Tazan's plan. Or perhaps he had seen the signal of Tazan's infiltration and come to save his brother from his own sacrifice. He was leading his own warriors, a desperate, suicidal charge to free the brother who had condemned him. "Bugler, sound the call!" A voice roared from the barracks. The fort exploded. Doors burst open. Soldiers, half-dressed, poured onto the parade ground, rifles in hand, their faces confused, looking first north to the stables, then south to the sound of the attack. "They are inside," a soldier yelled. Eve saw them, a small group of perhaps 20 Apache warriors, streaming over the south wall, having used ropes and the cover of darkness. They were led by a man on a bay horse, even wounded, even slumped. Kai rode like a part of the animal. He held a war club in his good hand, his face a mask of terrible, fevered purpose. "Tazan!" Eve screamed, pulling at his arm. "We must stop him. He will be killed." But Tazan was already running, not away, but toward the fight, his knife in his hand. "My brother!" he yelled. The fort became a vortex of chaos. The full moon, high and bright, shone down on the parade ground, illuminating the battle in a stark, brutal silver. The air filled with smoke, the screams of men, and the sharp, repeated crack of rifles. It was not a battle. It was a slaughterhouse. Colonel Hartley was in the center of it, his nightshirt tucked into his uniform trousers, his revolver in his hand. "Form a line," he roared. "To the south wall, hold the line." Eve stood frozen, trapped between her father's soldiers and Kai's warriors. Tazan was cut off. A group of soldiers, seeing him run, converged on him. "It is the chief, get the chief." He fought like a cornered lion, his knife a blur, but he was one man against 6. A rifle butt caught him in the side of the head. He staggered, and they were on him, dragging him to his knees. Kai saw it. He roared, a sound of pure, unadulterated rage, and spurred the bay horse directly at the knot of soldiers holding his brother. He swung his war club, clearing a path, his one good arm doing the work of 2. The soldiers scattered, turning their rifles on this new, mounted threat. The horse screamed as a bullet tore into its flank. It reared, throwing Kai from the saddle. He landed hard, the shock of the impact sending a visible shudder of pain through his body. His wounded shoulder, his shattered shoulder, hit the ground. A raw cry of agony was torn from his lips. He was on the ground. He was exposed. "Father!" Eve screamed, running into the open. "Stop, it is Tazan! They are here for Tazan!" Her father saw her. His face, already pale with the fury of the battle, turned ashen. "Evelyn, get back, get inside the house, that is an order." Then he saw the man on the ground, the man pushing himself up with one arm, his face contorted in pain. He recognized Kai. His expression changed. The confusion vanished, replaced by a cold, terrible certainty. He did not see a man trying to save his brother. He saw the savage who had stolen his daughter. He believed Kai was here for her. "This ends," Colonel Hartley said, his voice a low, lethal snarl. He raised his revolver, his arm steady, and took aim at Kai's chest. "This ends now, you savage." Kai was on one knee, his war club lost, his vision gray with pain. He looked up and saw the colonel, saw the black round hole of the pistol's muzzle. He was 20 feet away. There was no escape. Eve saw it, the straight line between her father's hatred and Kai's heart. She did not think, she did not plan, she did not weigh the consequences. She only moved. She ran. The 3 steps between her and Kai, she crossed in a single heartbeat. She threw herself in front of him, her arms spread wide, her back to her father. "No!" The world dissolved in a flash of white fire. The sound of the shot was deafening, a clap of thunder in her very ear. She felt a giant, invisible hand punch her high in the left arm, a searing, burning force that spun her completely around. She saw Kai's face, his eyes wide with an impossible, uncomprehending horror. Then her legs were gone, and the dusty parade ground rose up to meet her. The silence that fell was more profound than the noise. It was absolute, the crack of rifles, the shouts, the war cries, everything. stopped. Every eye in the fort, soldier and Apache alike, was fixed on the small, gray shape of the colonel's daughter, lying in a heap in the dust. Her father stood frozen, the smoking revolver still held out, his arm trembling. "Evelyn," he whispered. His mind could not accept what his eyes had seen. "Evelyn, my God." Kai was the first to move. The pain of his own body was forgotten, eclipsed by a new, sharper agony. He crawled to her, his one good arm pulling him across the dirt. "Eve," he choked, his voice a broken thing. She was on her side, her eyes squeezed shut, her hand clutching her upper arm. Blood, dark in the moonlight, was already soaking the sleeve of her dress. It hurts," she gasped. "Stop," a voice roared. It was Tazan. He had shaken off his captors in the confusion and was standing over them, his knife in his hand, a shield for his brother and the woman on the ground. Eve pushed herself up onto one elbow, her face pale and slick with sweat. The world was spinning, a sick, dizzying carousel of smoke and pale faces. She looked at her father. He was staring at her, at the blood, his face a mask of utter devastation. He had shot his own daughter. She looked at Kai, who was kneeling beside her, his hand hovering over her wound, afraid to touch her. She looked at Tazan, who stood ready to die. The rage she had felt, the injustice, it had all burned away, leaving a core of cold, clear truth. She staggered, pushing herself to her knees. Kai tried to steady her, but she shook him off. "Look!" she cried out, her voice thin but carrying in the terrible silence. She held up her bleeding arm for all to see. The blood dripped onto the dry Arizona dirt. "Look at what you have done." She stared at her father. "Your pride." She stared at Tazan. "Your honor." She stared at Kai. "And your revenge." She got to her feet, swaying, a small, bloody prophet in the center of a battlefield. "You are all so blind. You fight over the land, over women, over who is right and who is wrong, and this is all you get." She was shouting now, her voice breaking with pain and a terrible, profound grief. "No one wins this war. No one wins, only the earth that drinks the blood." She stood there, her words hanging in the smoky, moonlit air. The soldiers stared. Their rifles lowered, the Apache warriors stood. Their clubs and knives held loose, their faces stark with a new understanding. Her father's gun arm fell to his side. The revolver dropped from his nerveless fingers, landing softly in the dust. Kai looked at her. He looked at her not as a white woman, not as a prize, but as the hawk he had named. He saw the truth in her, the terrible, cleansing fire of it. He dropped his knife. He stood up, his body screaming in protest, his wounds a map of agony. He ignored Tazan. He ignored the soldiers. He ignored her father. He walked the 2 steps to where she stood swaying. He looked into her eyes, and in his, she saw the end of his war. With an infinite, impossible gentleness, he slid his one good arm under her knees, and his wounded arm, despite the torment it must have caused him, around her back. He lifted her. He held her against his chest, her head falling into the hollow of his neck, her blood staining his skin. He stood tall, a wounded Apache warrior holding the bleeding daughter of his enemy. He turned, his body shielding hers. He looked at Colonel Hartley, at the soldiers, at Tazan, at his own warriors. He held them all in his gaze, a silent, dispassionate judgment. He stood bathed in the red light of the smoke and the moon, and in that moment, he was the only thing in the world that was real, and no one, not a single man, dared to move. The silence of the parade ground was a living thing, a thick, heavy blanket that smothered the last echoes of the gunshot. Every man stood as a statue, their identities as soldier or warrior erased, replaced by the simple, shared horror of being a witness. Kai held her. He felt the warm, wet rush of her blood against his skin. It was his blood, It was her blood. It was the blood of the land, and it was all one. The pain in his own shattered shoulder was a distant, cold star, eclipsed by the burning sun of her body in his arms. He looked at her father, at the man who had just shot his own child, and his gaze was not one of hatred. It was a look of profound, terrible pity. Colonel Hartley's face was a ruin. The lines of command, the years of military pride, the mask of the officer, had dissolved, leaving only the raw, devastated face of a father. He took a single, stumbling step forward. "Evelyn!" It was Tazan who broke the spell. He coughed, a low, wet sound. He had been standing guard over them, his knife a silent threat. Now? He wavered. His hand went to his side, just below his ribs. When he pulled it away, it was black with blood. "Tazan," Kai said, his voice a low rasp. He had seen his brother hit by the rifle butt, but he had not seen the bayonet. In the chaos of his own capture, a soldier, afraid, had thrust upwards. Tazan looked at his own blood, his expression one of mild surprise. Then he looked at Kai, holding Eve. A slow, pained smile touched his lips. "It seems we are all wounded, brother." He collapsed. He did not fall. He simply folded, his legs giving way, sinking to his knees. The spell was broken. "Hey, doctor!" Colonel Hartley roared, his voice cracking. "Get the post doctor out here now." Soldiers ran. The Apache warriors surged forward, their face a mask of alarm, running to their fallen chief. Kai gently, so gently, laid Eve back on the ground. She was conscious, her face a pale, translucent white in the moonlight, her teeth gritted against the pain. "My arm," she gasped. "The bullet! It went through!" "The doctor is coming," Kai said. He ripped a strip from his own breechclout with his good hand and his teeth, and pressed it hard against her wound. She cried out, a small, sharp sound. "Hold this," he commanded. She nodded, her free hand coming up to press the cloth against her own bleeding arm. Kai turned and crawled on his hands and knees to his brother. Tazan was leaning against one of his warriors, his breathing shallow, his eyes already clouded. The Apache doctor, an old man with a face like a dried apple, was pressing herbs into the wound, but it was a gesture of ritual, not of medicine. The wound was too deep. "Brother," Tazan whispered, his hand fumbling, seeking Kai. Kai took his hand. He knelt in the dust, the leaderless warriors forming a silent, grieving circle around them. "You are chief now." Tazan breathed. The words were a painful effort. This was my fault, my pride. I did not listen." "Be still," Kai said, his throat thick. "Save your strength." No strength left." Tazan's eyes found Kai's. "Listen, the people, they are afraid. The white men are a flood. You must be the rock." "I will be," Kai said. Tazan's gaze shifted, moving past Kai to where Eve was being lifted onto a stretcher by two soldiers. The post doctor, a harried man with spectacles, was already cutting away her sleeve. "She," Tazan coughed, a spray of blood. "She is not the flood, brother. She is the new earth, the one you protect. She is the last heartbeat of both tribes. Do you see?" He was not just talking about Eve. He was talking about the future, a future where blood was mixed, where pride was buried, a future that had to be born from this single, terrible night. "I see," Kai said. "Then lead them." Tazan's hand gripped Kai's with a final, shuddering strength. "Be the chief. I was not." Tazan's head fell back. His breath sighed out, a long, final release, and was gone. A single high wail of grief rose from one of the warriors. It was echoed by another. The sound of their sorrow filled the parade ground. Kai knelt there, holding his brother's hand. The new, crushing weight of leadership settling onto his broken shoulders. He was the chief. His brother was dead. His people were in an enemy fort, surrounded. And the woman he loved, the woman who had caused all of it and ended all of it, was being carried away by the men who had just tried to hang him. He felt his warriors looking at him. He felt the soldiers watching him. He felt the empty, desolate stare of Colonel Hartley. Kai laid his brother's hand gently on his chest. He stood up. He stood on his one good leg, his left side a universe of fire, his shattered shoulder screaming. He was the chief. He looked at Colonel Hartley. "You will. Let my people take him. We will take our chief." Colonel Hartley, his face gray and aged a decade in an hour, just nodded. He looked at his soldiers. "Let them pass. Stand down. All of you, stand down." The Apache warriors lifted Tazan's body. They walked, a slow, grieving procession, past the soldiers, past the parade ground, toward the south gate, which now stood open and broken. Kai took one step to follow them. "Where are you going?" It was Colonel Hartley's voice. Kai stopped. He turned. "You are wounded." The colonel said. His voice was dead, hollowed out. My daughter, she is wounded. The doctor is tending to her. He will tend to you. That is all I have left." It was not a command. It was a plea, a broken man asking for a chance to fix one small part of the world he had just shattered. Kai looked at his people, disappearing into the darkness. Then he looked at the infirmary, the small plank building where a bright light now burned. He gave a single, curt nod. He walked, each step in agony, across the parade ground and into the infirmary. For 5 days, the fort was a place of ghosts, a truce, unspoken but absolute, held. The Apache did not attack. The soldiers did not patrol. Colonel Hartley locked himself in his quarters, refusing to see anyone. A bottle of whiskey his only companion. Eve lay in a cot in the infirmary. The bullet had passed clean through the flesh of her upper arm, missing the bone. It was a painful, searing wound, but it would heal. The post doctor, a quiet man named Harris, had stitched it, cleaned it, and bound it. Kai was in the cot opposite her. His wound was far worse. The doctor had spent 2 hours digging out the shattered pieces of lead and bone from his shoulder, his face grim. Kai had refused the laudanum, had refused the whiskey. He had lain on the table, his hand gripping the wooden frame until his knuckles were white, his body rigid. A single line of sweat on his temple, but he had not made a sound. The doctor had set the bone as best he could, but his prognosis was grim. "He will live," he told Eve, in a low voice, as he washed his hands. "But he will never have the full use of that arm again. The strength, it will be gone. He will not be the warrior he was." Kai had heard him. His eyes, closed in a mask of pain, did not flicker. They lay there, 10 feet apart, in a room that smelled of carbolic acid and bandages. They did not speak. There was nothing to say. The silence was a new, fragile country they were both exploring. They would watch each other. She would watch him as he slept. His face finally relaxed, the scar on his cheek stark against his pale, fevered skin. He would watch her as she tried, awkwardly, to drink water with her one good hand. The world had been stripped down to this: breathing, healing, watching. On the 6th day, the Apache elders came. 3 old men, their faces like carved rock, walked into the fort. They carried no weapons. The soldiers, under new orders from a humbled post commander, let them pass. They came to the infirmary. They stood at the foot of Kai's bed. Kai, his chest and shoulder wrapped in a thick swath of white bandages. pushed himself up with his good arm. He sat, his back against the wall, his face impassive. He was their chief. They spoke for a long time in the low, guttural tones of the Apache language. Eve could not understand the words, but she understood the tone. It was not angry, it was sad, and it was final. She watched Kai's face. It did not change, but a shadow grew in his eyes, a darkness that had not been there before. He listened. He asked one question, his voice low. The oldest elder answered, his voice firm. Kai nodded once. The elders bowed their heads, a gesture of respect and sorrow. Then they turned, and they left. Silence filled the room, thicker this time, colder. "What is it?" Eve finally asked, her voice a whisper. "What did they say?" Kai was silent for a long time, staring at the rough, planked wall. "They buried my brother," he said, his voice flat. "They have mourned him. Now, they need their chief." "You," she said. "They need you. You are going back." A strange, cold panic began to bloom in her chest. He turned his head slowly, and his eyes met hers. The raw, unguarded emotion she had seen in the cave, in the parade ground, was gone. He was a chief again. He was the rock. "They have made a decision," he said. "The law is the law. The traditions are old. My brother, Tazan, he broke them. He brought a white woman into our lands. He died. I broke them. I fought for her. I love her." He said the words simply as a statement of fact, like saying, "The sky is blue." "They say the tribe cannot heal." He continued, his voice a monotone. "They cannot be strong, while the ghost of this war is living with them. They cannot follow a chief whose heart is divided." "Divided?" she whispered, the cold panic turning to ice. "They have given me the choice," he said, his gaze as sharp and as final as a knife. "I am their chief, but I cannot be their chief and be your man." The words hung in the sterile air. They are making you choose," she said, her mind struggling to grasp it. "I must choose," he said. "I can be Kai, the chief of the Apache people. I can lead them. I can try to save them from your father's world. Or I can be Kai, the man, with you." "And if you choose me," she breathed, afraid of the answer. "Then I am no longer chief," he said. "I am no longer Apache. I am Inda, the dead, exiled. I can never return to their lands. I can never speak to them again. I will be a man with no people, no home, no name." He had laid the two choices at her feet, his soul or his heart. Eve looked at him. She looked at his broken shoulder, the shoulder he had shattered saving his brother, saving her. She saw the man who had called her a hawk. She saw the chief who had held his dying brother. She could not be the one to rip his roots from the earth. She could not be the one to make him an outcast, a ghost, a man with no name. He was a chief. He was a rock. He belonged to that land, to those mountains, to those people. She was the one who did not belong. "I see," she said. Her voice did not shake. The coldness inside her had turned to a terrible, clear, diamond-hard strength. She swung her legs out of the cot. She stood up. Her knees were weak, but she locked them. "Dr. Harris," she called out, I am well. I am leaving." Kai stared at her, his one good hand clenching the rough blanket. What are you doing?" "I am making the choice for you," she said, turning to face him. She would not cry. She would not be weak. She would be the hawk. "You cannot choose, so I will." "Eve, no, you cannot. Where will you go, your father?" "My father is a broken man in a bottle," she said, her voice cold. "He is not my father anymore, and I am not his daughter. I am not a bride. I am not anything. I am just me, and I am leaving. I will not let you, he said, his voice a low growl. He tried to stand, but the movement sent a spasm of agony through his side, and he fell back against the cot, his face pale with pain. You cannot stop me, she said, her voice softening, the coldness cracking, just for a moment. You are a chief, Kai. Your people, they are waiting for you. They need you. You cannot lead them if you are always looking back, watching me. You must go forward. I will not, he said, his voice thick. I will not let you go alone. I will choose you. I will be the exile. No, she said. She walked to his bed. She knelt, so her face was level with his. She put her good hand on his. You will not. You will be the man your brother died for. You will be the man who leads his people. You will be the rock. That is who you are. And who are you? He asked, his dark eyes searching hers, a raw pleading in them. I am the hawk, she whispered. And you are mending my wing. Now I have to fly, alone, to see if I can. He said nothing, his jaw tight, a terrible war fighting behind his eyes. This is not goodbye, she said, her voice finally breaking, a single tear escaping, rolling hot down her cheek. This is not the end. She rose and walked to the door. She stopped, her hand on the latch, her back to him. I will go, she said. I will find a place that is not yours and not my father's. And I will wait. And if you ever call for me, I will come back. Her voice dropped to a whisper. I do not care if it is in the middle of a sandstorm. I will come. She opened the door and walked out, into the hot, bright, indifferent sun of the parade ground. She found the doctor. She had him give her supplies, a horse, a canteen, food. He did not argue. He had seen the elders. He understood. She rode out of the south gate, the same gate Kai had charged. She did not look back. That evening, Kai, his body still on fire, pulled himself from the infirmary. He found a horse. He rode out of the fort, into the hills. He rode to the high place, the place of the old ones, the rim of a dormant volcano that overlooked the entire valley. He stood there, his arm in a sling, his body a map of pain. He watched the sunset, a smear of blood and purple. He was alone. He was the chief. He had his people. He had his honor. He had his land. He had lost everything. He stood on the rim of the cold, ash-filled crater, but deep beneath his feet, he could feel the earth. It was not dead. It was sleeping, and it was still warm. 1 year, a full turning of the seasons, but the land had forgotten how to turn. It had only learned how to burn. The summer of 1874 was not a season. It was a judgment. The sun had become a blind, white eye, and it did not blink. The San Pedro River, once a lifeblood, had shrunk to a series of stagnant, muddy pools, and the fish had boiled in them. The drought was a slow, tightening fist, and where the drought walked, the sickness followed. It started in the new settlements. A cough that turned to a fever that turned to blood. The white men called it lung fever. It spread to the fort, and then carried on the wind. It spread to the high, dry lands of the Apache. Kai was chief. He was the rock, as Tazan had asked. He led his people from the dying lowlands up to the high mountains, to the springs that only they knew. But the springs were drying, and the game had fled. His people, the strongest people on earth, were growing thin. The children's bellies were empty, and the fever had taken the old. He stood on the volcanic rim, the place he had gone after she left, and he looked down on his village. He was a chief of a dying people. The wound in his shoulder had healed, but it had healed badly. The doctor had been right. It was a mass of scarred, tight muscle, a constant, dull ache that reminded him of all he had lost. His left arm was not a warrior's arm. It was a chief's arm. It was strong enough to lift a child, to hold a peace pipe, but it was slow. He could no longer draw a bow with the lightning speed of his youth. He was a leader who led with his mind, with his will, with the terrible weight of his title. He had not called for her. A chief could not call for a white woman, for the one who had cost him his brother, the council of elders, the men who had given him his choice. They respected him. They saw his pain, and they saw his sacrifice, and they obeyed. But there was a distance. He was the chief, but he was alone. One morning, a scout returned. His horse lathered. He did not go to the council lodge. He came straight to Kai, who was skinning a small, stringy rabbit, his left arm clumsy with the knife. "She is here," the scout said, his voice a low, disbelieving grunt. Kai's hand froze. The knife slipped, cutting his finger. He stared at the drop of his own blood welling on his knuckle, and for the first time in a year, his heart, that cold, dead stone, beat once, hard against his ribs. He walked to the edge of the mesa. They were not a military column. They were 3 heavy freight wagons, pulled by mules, crawling up the dry, rocky wash. They were led by a single rider on a tough buckskin horse. It was her. She was not the woman he remembered. The lace and the gray cotton were gone. She wore buckskin trousers, like a man, and a loose linen shirt, the color of the dust. Her hair was not in curls, but tied back in a long, practical braid. Her skin was not pale. It had been baked by the sun to the color of new copper. She was thin, hard, and she rode with an easy, tired confidence. The hawk had not only mended its own wing, it had grown new, stronger feathers. She pulled her horse to a stop at the bottom of the trail, knowing she would not be welcome. She looked up, her gaze finding him immediately, as if a string connected them across the 100 yards of rock. Kai walked down the path. The women of the village emerged from their wickiups, their faces thin and gaunt. When they saw her, their expressions of hunger turned to hatred. "Inda," one of the old women hissed, using the word for the dead, the name for an outcast. "The White Witch! She has brought her poison back." Another woman, whose child had died in the fever, spat on the ground at Eve's feet. Eve did not flinch. She did not look at them. Her eyes were fixed on Kai. She dismounted, her movements stiff. He stopped 10 feet from her. He saw the year that had passed. It was in the new lines around her eyes, the hardness of her mouth. She was no longer a girl. She was a woman, forged in the same sun that was trying to kill them. He, the chief, could see the hatred of his people. He could feel their fear, their suspicion. But Kai, the man, could only see her face, his eyes, his dark, steady, chief's eyes held her, and in their depths, she saw it, the shadow, the part of him she had taken with her. He still held her. "You have come," he said. His voice was rough, a chief's voice. "You are sick," she said. Her voice was just as steady. It was not a question. "The fever, it is in the water, it is in the air. I brought medicine." She nodded back at the wagons, quinine, casks of clean water, sacks of flour. "We are not your people," Kai said, the words forced. "We do not take your gifts." "I am not giving gifts," Eve said, her voice hard. "I am making a trade. I am not a bride. I am not a peacemaker. I am a merchant. I have medicine. You have land. I will stay here, in this valley, and I will give this medicine to any who need it. Yours, mine, anyone, in exchange. I claim this valley, this neutral ground." She had not come back for him. She had come back for herself. She had come back with a purpose. "Who are these?" he asked. nodding to the men on the wagons. "Dr. Elias Thorne," she said. An old, grizzled man with a beard to his chest and tobacco-stained teeth raised a hand. He was an army surgeon. He did not like the army. Two other men, tough teamsters with pistols on their hips, sat holding rifles, their eyes scanning the rocks. "They are paid. They are here to protect the medicine." Kai looked at her. She had come with a doctor, with guards, with supplies. She had, in 1 year, built a life. "The fever, it is bad," he finally admitted. "I know," she said. "I saw it at the fort. I saw it in Tucson. It is everywhere." "Your father," he said, the question low. "He is gone," she said. "Recalled to Washington. In disgrace. He is a broken man. I have not seen him since the day I left." The old woman who had spat on her shouted something in Apache. "Send her away! She is a bad omen!" "She is not an omen," Kai said, turning his head, his voice ringing with a command that cut the air. She is here. She will not be touched." He turned back to Eve. "The valley, you will stay in the old ruins, by the spring." "Yes, it is done," he said. He, the chief, had made a bargain. He turned and walked away, his back straight, his wounded arm held stiffly at his side. For a week, she was an island. The Apache did not approach. They watched from the rocks as she and Dr. Thorne set up a crude infirmary in the ruins of an old Spanish mission, but the fever did not respect their pride. The first to come was the woman whose child had died. She came in the night, carrying her second child, a small boy, his body burning. She did not speak. She did not look at Eve. She simply held out her son, an offering of desperate, silent need. Eve took the child. She and the doctor worked all night, cooling him with wet rags, forcing the bitter quinine and water down his throat. By morning, the fever had broken. The woman looked at Eve. The hatred was gone. She just nodded, once, took her child, and left. After that, they came, in a trickle, then a flood. Eve worked until her good arm ached, her bad arm a dull throb. She ground the medicine. She measured the water. She cleaned the sick. She was tireless. Kai watched from the cliffs. He watched her move, her hands gentle but firm. He watched her stand her ground against the fear of his people. He saw the hawk, and his pride in her was a physical ache, a pain as sharp as his shoulder. The truce was fragile. The land was still dying, and there were other, hungrier eyes watching. They came at dusk, on the 8th day. They were not Apache. They were not soldiers. They were the dregs of the border, men who had run from the law in 2 countries, scavengers. They had seen the wagons. They knew what medicine was worth in a dry year. There were 15 of them, led by a man named Silas Croft, a huge bearded man whose cruelty was a legend from Tucson to the border. The first shot killed one of Eve's teamsters, a bullet that took him in the chest as he guarded the wagons. "The medicine!" Croft roared, his voice echoing in the small valley. "Give us the medicine, and the woman, and we might let the rest of you natives live." The camp exploded. Eve grabbed her rifle, the one she had bought in Tucson. She pushed Dr. Thorne and the Apache children behind the mission wall. "Stay down." Kai and his warriors were there in a heartbeat. They had been watching, expecting this. They came down from the rocks, not with war cries, but with the silent, lethal precision of ghosts. But Kai was not the warrior he had been. He could not lead the charge. He directed his men, his voice sharp, pointing, finding the weaknesses in the robbers' attack. Eve fought beside them. She was not a warrior, but she was a marksman. She knelt, her arm braced on the stone wall, and she fired, reloaded, fired. Each shot was deliberate. Each shot counted. The battle was a confused, brutal swirl of smoke, dust, and close, desperate fighting. Kai saw Croft. The leader. Break through the line, running for the medicine wagon. Kai moved to intercept him. Croft laughed when he saw him. "The one-armed chief. This is too easy." He drew a long, heavy skinning knife and rushed him. Kai drew his own. He met the charge, his good arm taking the force of the blow. Croft was a bull, a creature of pure, brutal strength. He pressed his advantage, raining blows on Kai, who could only parry, his feet moving, his bad arm held close to his body, useless as a shield. Croft was toying with him. He feinted, then slammed the pommel of his knife against Kai's wounded shoulder. Kai screamed. It was a raw, agonizing sound. The pain was blinding, a white light that erased the world. His knife fell from his nerveless right hand. He was unarmed. Croft smiled, a slow, ugly thing. He raised his knife for the killing thrust. "Goodbye, Chief." Eve saw it. She had a clear shot. She raised her rifle, the bead settling on the center of Croft's broad back. Kai saw her. Through the red haze of his pain, he saw her. He locked his eyes on hers. He did not plead. He did not command. He just held her gaze. This was his fight, his honor. Eve lowered the rifle. Her face was pale, but she understood. Croft lunged, and Kai moved. He did not try to block. He did not try to run. He lunged forward. Inside the arc of the knife, he drove his head hard into Croft's face. There was a wet, satisfying crunch of bone. Croft roared. His lunge deflected, the knife slashing empty air. Kai's bad arm, his useless arm, snaked out. It was not strong, but it was fast enough. He grabbed Croft's wrist, the one holding the knife, and locked it. His fingers a steel trap. The pain in his shoulder was a universe, but he held on. He used Croft's own weight, his own momentum, and he pulled, spinning him, driving that knife hand, with all his remaining strength, straight into the chest of another robber who was running up behind him. The second robber stared, gurgled, and fell, pulling Croft down with him. Croft scrambled to get up, but Kai was on him, his good hand finding the knife he had dropped. It was not a duel. It was a brawl. It was dust and sweat and grunting. Animal sounds. Kai, with one arm, was all over him, a thing of pure, desperate will. He was the hawk, his talons out, and he would not be denied. He drove the knife home, once. The robbers, seeing their leader fall, broke. They ran, vanishing into the rocks, leaving their dead behind. Silence fell again. The second battle in this valley was over. They had lost. 3 Apache, her last teamster, 4 of the robbers. The valley floor was littered with the cost of medicine. They worked together, Apache and White, to bury the dead. They did not bury them in separate graves. They buried them in one long trench, side by side. The sun was setting. It was a deep, impossible, bloody red, staining the clouds, staining the mountains. Eve and Kai stood by the graves. They were covered in grime, in sweat, in blood, his, hers, their enemies. "You should not have lowered the rifle," he said, his voice a low rasp. He was cradling his left arm. It was ruined, the shoulder dislocated, the old wound torn open. "You looked at me," she said. She was not looking at him. She was looking at the fresh dirt. "He could have killed me." "He did not," she said. They were quiet for a long time. The first stars began to pierce the purple sky. "You came back," he said. "The land was sick. I heard the call." He turned, his body stiff with pain. He looked at her. The chief was gone. The warrior was gone. It was just Kai. "I did not call for you. I was proud. I am a fool." "No," she said, her voice soft. "You are a chief. You did what you had to do." "And you," he said. "You did what you had to do. You became this." He motioned to her rifle. "To the clinic. To the wagons." "Yes," she said. He took a step, his breath hissing as he moved his arm. "The council. They said I must choose. They said my heart could not be divided." She finally turned to look at him. "Is it?" He met her gaze. The year of loneliness, the year of grief, the year of being a rock. All of it was in his eyes. "No," he said, his voice thick. "It was never divided. It has been yours. It has been yours since you stood in the dust, in that white dress, and looked at me as if I were a man." The tears she had not shed, the tears she had held back for a year, burned in her eyes. "We chose this, Kai. You and I. This is what we are." He reached out, his one good hand, and touched her face, his fingers rough, tracing the line of her cheekbone. "We chose each other," he whispered, his voice raw, "even when the world did not." The fire in the mission ruin was the only light in the valley. It was a still, quiet night, the land holding its breath, exhausted from blood. Dr. Thorne, his face a mask of weary concentration, finished binding Kai's arm. It was a terrible sight. The shoulder was dislocated again, the old wound torn wide. This time, the doctor had not been gentle. He had forced the bone back into its socket with a brutal, efficient shove that had made Kai cry out, a sharp, ragged sound. Eve had held his good hand through all of it. Now, he sat by the fire, his arm bound tight to his chest, his face pale and slick with sweat. He was a chief, but he was a broken one. The fight with Croft had cost him the last of his strength, the last of his warrior's pride. "It will heal," the doctor said, packing his bag. "But it will never be a weapon again. Son, you are a one-armed man, and that is the long and short of it. You will learn to use it as a brace. Nothing more." Kai nodded, his eyes closed, accepting the verdict. He had known. Eve sat beside him, her own arm aching. She watched the Apache elders, the same 3 men who had given Kai his impossible choice. As they walked into the firelight, they had helped bury the dead. Their faces were grim, but the hatred she had seen before was gone, replaced by a deep, weary confusion. They stopped before Kai. He opened his eyes, met their gaze. He did not rise. He could not. The oldest, a man named Garak, spoke. His voice was like stones grinding together. He spoke in Apache, slow, deliberate, and this time he looked at Eve as he spoke. Kai did not translate, but she did not need him to. She had been practicing, listening. She caught the words. Blood. One grave. The white woman. Healer. When the elder finished, he looked at Kai, waiting. Kai took a slow breath, the air hissing through his teeth. "He says," Kai said, his voice low, for Eve's ears, "that the law is the law, but the land is new. He says they buried their sons next to your teamster. He says the blood is mixed in the earth. He says you fought like an Apache woman." "And the choice," Eve whispered. "The choice is gone," Kai said. He looked at the elder, and for the first time, Eve heard the full, clear authority of his voice as he spoke to his people. He did not plead. He did not argue. He stated a fact. He spoke for a long time. He spoke of Tazan, of his brother's sacrifice. He spoke of his own pride, his blindness. He spoke of the blood on the parade ground. And then he reached out his good hand, not to Eve, but to the fire. "My heart," he said, his voice ringing in the small valley, "is here, in this valley. It is with my people." He turned his hand, palm up. "And it is with this woman. It is not divided. It is whole. I am your chief. I will lead you, but I will lead you from here. I will not leave her, and I will not leave you. If that is not enough, then you must find a new chief." He had laid his life at their feet. The three old men looked at each other. The silence stretched, filled only by the crackle of the fire. Finally, Garak nodded. A single, slow movement. Our chief has spoken. This valley, it is Ijkain, the place of healing. It is not for the tribe. It is not for the white man. It is his. They had their compromise. He was their chief. But this valley, this neutral ground she had claimed in desperation, was now their home. His and hers. A place apart. A new thing. The next month, the rains came. A slow, healing, blessed rain that washed the blood from the rocks and the sickness from the air. The river rose. With the rain came a new commander at Fort Grant, a practical man, a major who had seen too much war and had no stomach for the colonel's old vendettas. He had read the reports. He had heard the stories from his own men, of the colonel's daughter, of the 2 battles, of the shared graves. He sent a rider under a white flag. He asked for a parley. Kai met him. He met him not as a fugitive, but as a chief. He rode the bay horse, his left arm in a black sling, his back straight. Eve and Dr. Thorne stood with him, at the edge of the mission ruins. They did not speak of peace. They spoke of boundaries. They spoke of trade. The new major, his eyes assessing, saw the truth. He saw a one-armed chief who had won the loyalty of his people. He saw a white woman who was not a captive, but a partner. He saw a new power in the valley. They signed the paper, a simple, 1-page document. The San Pedro River was the boundary. The Apache would keep to the high country. The soldiers would keep to the low. And the valley, the Mission Valley, was a neutral territory, a place for trade, governed by no one, protected by all. It was the first honest treaty that land had ever seen. 2 weeks later, another rider came. He was not a soldier. He was a mail courier. He carried a single, thick envelope, postmarked from St. Louis. Eve took it, her hands trembling. The handwriting was her father's. She opened it inside the small adobe room she and Kai now shared. He sat on the cot, watching her. She read. The letter was not long. He was not a man of many words. He spoke of his retirement, a forced one. He spoke of the hearing in Washington. He spoke of the shame. But most of all, he spoke of that night. I saw you fall. He wrote, I saw my own hand, my own bullet, strike you down. I have killed many men, Evelyn. It is the cost of a soldier's life. But in that moment, I saw that I had killed my own daughter. I had killed everything. I see Tazan's face in my dreams. I see the face of the man I was about to hang. He did not ask her to forgive him. He did not ask her to come home. He only said, at the end, the man you chose. He is a better man than I. I pray you find the peace I have lost. Tucked inside the letter was a deed, a legal, binding deed from the territorial office. For the 1 square mile of land that held the Mission Valley in the spring, he had purchased it with the last of his money. A final, clumsy act of penance. A cage, this time, that he was giving her the key to. She put the letter down. He has given us the land, she whispered. We were already here, Kai said. He did not understand the white man's paper. Yes, she said, but now they were safe, not just from bullets, but from laws. They called it Red Mesa Homestead. Life began. It was a hard life, a life of dirt and stone and sun, but it was a shared life. Dr. Thorne, his beard now long and white, stayed. He had, he said, found his last, best fight, and it was against ignorance, not men. The homestead grew. They rebuilt the old mission walls, not as a church, but as a house. They used Apache methods to mix the adobe and white man's hinges on the doors. And the children came. The first was the Apache boy, Noche, the one whose fever had broken. His mother, the woman who had hated Eve, had walked into the hills one night and not returned, her grief too great. Noche, a silent 4-year-old with his mother's dark, watching eyes, simply attached himself to Kai. He followed him everywhere, a small, devoted shadow. The second was a girl, Sarah. A patrol of soldiers found her wandering near the ruins of a burned-out homestead 20 miles south. She was 6. She had not spoken a word since she had seen her family killed. She was brought to the mission, the only safe place. Eve held her, hummed to her, for 3 days, until the child finally cried, a storm of grief that lasted an entire night. Soon there were 2 more, a white boy, Tim, whose father had died in the mines, an Apache girl, Tali, whose family had been lost to the fever. They were a new tribe, 4 children, none of them related, who brawled and played and slept in a shared room, their skin a mix of copper and pale white. They spoke a new language, a mix of halting English and fast, guttural Apache. The evenings were the time of peace. The children would be asleep. The high desert air would be cool, the sky a vast, impossible spray of stars. Eve and Kai would sit by the fire. She had a primer and a pencil. "This," she would say, pointing, "this is H for hawk." He would take the pencil. His right hand was still strong, but it was large, awkward, built for a knife, not a pencil. His left arm rested in the sling, a constant, dark reminder. He would painstakingly trace the letter, H. H, he would repeat, his voice a low rumble. "Hawk." Then he would point to the sky. "Gun," he would say. "Gun," she would repeat, the sound strange in her eastern mouth. "Sky." He would nod, a rare, soft smile touching his lips. You speak with a rock in your mouth, but you learn." "And you write like a child," she would tease, her hand finding his. "I am a child," he would say, his voice serious, his thumb brushing her knuckles. "In your world, and you, in mine, we are teaching each other to be born." One evening, almost 2 years after the battle, they walked by the river. The drought was a memory. The land was green, the spring rains had been gentle, and the cottonwoods were full and lush. The air smelled of wet sand and new grass. Eve was walking slowly. Her body was heavy, full. She was deep into her pregnancy. Her belly a round, tight drum under her linen dress. She stood at the water's edge, her hand on the small of her back, and watched the children, her children, Noche and Sarah and the others, splashing in the shallows, their laughter a bright, clean sound. Kai came to stand behind her. He did not touch her. He just stood there, a solid, warm presence at her back. He was a chief. He was a father. He was a one-armed rancher. He has not kicked all day," she said, her voice quiet. "He is lazy." Kai moved. Then he stepped forward, and his good arm, his right arm, came around her. It was not a passionate embrace. It was a shelter. His hand, calloused and large, spread open, covering the curve of her belly. He splayed his fingers, feeling the taut skin, the life beneath. He stood there, his cheek resting against her hair, and they were quiet, just breathing. Then he felt it, a strong, sudden, rolling kick against his palm, a small fist, or a foot, pushing against his hand from inside her. His breath caught. He had felt death. He had held his dying brother. He had seen battle, and blood, and endings. This was the first time he had ever truly felt a beginning. He pressed his hand firmer. The child kicked again, a strong, rebellious message. A low, soft sound rumbled in his chest, a laugh. "He is not lazy," Kai whispered, his lips brushing her ear. She leaned her head back against his shoulder, his good shoulder, her hand covering his on her belly. "This child," he said, his voice thick with an emotion she had never heard, a kind of wondering awe. He will not belong to any skin. He will not be Apache. He will not be white. He will only belong to freedom. She closed her eyes, and for the first time in her life, she felt no fear. She was not a hawk. She was not a dove. She was a woman standing by a river with her husband. The wind blew, and it carried no threats, no smell of smoke, no dust. It carried only the clean, sweet scent of the wet earth and the promise of peace. It was 1876. 3 years had passed. 3 years since the land had broken, and 3 years since the rains had come to heal it. Red Mesa Homestead was no longer a collection of ruins and wagons. It was a place. The adobe walls of the old mission had been rebuilt, thick and strong, cool in the summer heat. The spring was now a deep, stone-lined well, its water clean and cold. The graves on the hill were covered in the tough yellow grass of the high desert, and the valley floor was green. Life had taken root. The sound of the homestead was the sound of children. Noche, who was now 7 years old, silent and watchful, was teaching Tazan Kai Hartley, who was almost 3, how to set a snare for a rabbit. The younger boy, Tazan Kai, was a perfect, impossible blend of 2 worlds, with his mother's clear, determined eyes and his father's dark hair and silent, patient way. Nearby, Sarah, now a whip-smart girl of 9, was reading from a worn copy of a Boston primer. She was reading to Tim and Tally, her voice clear in the morning air. The children argued and played and protected each other, their skins a shifting palette of copper and pale olive, and their language a strange, beautiful mix of Apache and English. They were a new tribe, belonging only to the valley. Eve sat on the long shaded porch, a heavy, leather-bound journal open on her lap. Her hand, brown from the sun and strong from the work, held a pencil. She had become the valley's memory, its storyteller. She wrote down the remedies Dr. Thorne taught her, the stories the Apache elders told, the first words of her son. She looked up from the page, her gaze drawn to the center of the courtyard. There, impossible against the red rock, a small apple tree stood in a cloud of white blossoms. Dr. Thorne had brought it as a sapling, a desperate, hopeful experiment, and she had been sure it would die. For 2 years, it had been a dry, brittle stick, a monument to their failed attempts to tame the land. But this spring, the spring of 1876, it had awakened. The blossoms were a fragile, fragrant promise, a sign of rebirth. Eve smiled, a slow, quiet smile that had replaced the quick, nervous expressions of her youth. She wrote a new line in her journal. The land does not forget what is buried, but it forgives. The apple tree is blooming. Her gaze lifted from the tree, past the valley, to the high volcanic rim, the dark line of basalt that met the sky. A small pile of stones stood there. It was not a grave, and it was not a cross. It was a marker, a cairn, built by Kai's own hand, on the spot where he had stood the night he chose his people, the night she had left. It was Tazan's place. It was a memorial to the chief who had died for his brother, a brother he had wronged. It was a symbol of sacrifice, a hard, stone reminder that the peace they now lived in had not been a gift. It had been purchased. It had been bought with Tazan's honor, with Kai's shoulder, with her father's soul, and with the blood of good men, both Apache and white, who lay buried together on the hill. Kai went there, sometimes. She would watch him, a tall, solitary figure, his left arm held in its customary sling, his right hand resting on the stones. He would stand for an hour, looking out over the land, his land. He was a chief, and he was a man, and he was carrying the weight of both. Eve looked down at the last letter tucked into her journal. The paper was soft, the creases worn. It had come a year ago, carried by a weary rider, bearing the postmark of a town in Virginia. It was the last letter she would ever receive from Colonel Hartley. It was not a letter of apology, not in the way a Boston man would write one. He was not capable of that. It was a confession. I have been retired from the service. He had written, his hand surprisingly shaky. There was a hearing. I told them what I saw. I told them I fired the shot that struck my own daughter. I have spent my life in service to the flag. Evelyn, I believed peace was a thing that could be forced, an order to be given at the end of a bayonet. I was wrong. The peace you have built in that valley, a peace made of blood and medicine and common ground, is stronger than any army. He had not asked for forgiveness. He had not asked to see her, or his grandson. He had only ended the letter with a single line. You have taught me that true peace does not come from the cannon. It must grow from the human heart. She had wept when she read it, a final, cleansing grief for the father she had lost, and for the man he had, too late, become. The sun began to dip, painting the high, thin clouds in shades of fire and rose. It was July 4th. The date meant nothing to the Apache and little to her. But at Fort Grant, now commanded by the practical, reasonable major who had signed their treaty, it was a day of celebration. Dr. Thorne, who now simply went by Elias, lit his pipe. The sweet smoke a familiar, comforting scent. The children, fed and washed, were being put to bed by Noche and Sarah, who had taken on the roles of protective older siblings. Kai came to stand beside her on the porch. He moved with a quiet, solid grace, his one good arm strong and sure. The years of hard work, of building and ranching and leading, had settled him. The haunted, angry warrior was gone, replaced by a man who knew exactly who he was. He came to stand beside her, their shoulders almost touching. They did not speak for a long time. They just watched the sky bleed its color into the growing dark. In the far, far distance, on the other side of the river, a small spark of green light shot into the sky and exploded in a silent, beautiful shower. The soldiers were celebrating. Gunpowder, Kai said, his voice a low rumble. A loud noise to celebrate their freedom. Eve smiled, and her hand found his right hand, calloused and warm, closed around hers, lacing their fingers together. They celebrate for one night, she said softly, leaning her head against his good shoulder. The left one, the broken one, was a part of him, a part of their story. She was no longer afraid of it. Yes, he said. He looked at the distant, glittering pops of red and blue light. Their freedom is a sound. He turned his gaze from the sky to her face, his dark eyes, which had once held such cold contempt, now held a universe of warmth, a deep, steady light that was her anchor, her home. My freedom, he whispered, is quiet. He lifted her hand, his head bowing, and he pressed his lips to her knuckles, a gesture of profound, unbreakable devotion. And it is every night. She closed her eyes, her heart full, feeling the simple, solid truth of his hand in hers, the cool desert air on her face, and the sound of her sleeping children breathing in the house they had built. People said the bride was meant for his brother, but Western love never follows a set path. It crosses sand, blood, and wind then blooms in the hearts of those who dare to believe. Thank you so much for listening to this story. Where are you listening from? Let us know in the comments below. We would love to connect and share our thoughts. Please subscribe to our channel, Wild West Tales, and give this video a like. If you enjoyed it, please support us by hitting that hype button so this story can be heard by even more people.